Welcome to the Lore Weaver podcast, where we explore fantasy, history, world building, and the stories that shape our imaginations. Here we dive deep from A Song of Ice and Fire analysis, to book reviews, to real historical parallels behind your favorite worlds. If you enjoy thoughtful takes, close readings, and long form discussion, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. Before we begin, I want to be very clear about what this episode is and what it is not. This is not a podcast about Blake Lively, Taylor Swift, or the legal dispute surrounding It Ends With Us and Justin Baldoni. Others are covering this situation in depth and are frankly doing it very well. What I am interested in is something much more narrow, and honestly much more frustrating for me. Once again, Daenerys Targaryen has been pulled into a real-world power struggle as a shorthand for dominance, intimidation, and leverage. Once again, she's being invoked as a fantasy of unchecked authority, with Dracarys, fire, and dragons as keywords, by people who fundamentally misunderstand who she is, what her story is about, and even what her name is. When someone says, "I'm Khaleesi, I have dragons," what they're actually doing is collapsing an entire character arc into a threat metaphor. They're stripping Daenerys of her ethics, her doubt, her sacrifice, and her failures, as well as her successes, and keeping only the aesthetic of power. And that's the issue, because Daenerys' story is not about ruling through fear. It's about what it costs to try to rule ethically in a world that punishes mercy, compromises reform, and rewards cruelty. Now, the reason this conversation has resurfaced is because of a specific comparison, one that frames Daenerys as a figure of leverage. In a text message from Blake Lively to Justin Baldoni, Lively wrote, "If you ever get around to watching Game of Thrones, you'll appreciate that I'm Khaleesi, and like her, I happen to have a few dragons, for better or worse, but usually for better, because my dragons also protect those I fight for. So really, we all benefit from those gorgeous monsters of mine. You will too, I can promise you." So, strip away the fantasy language, the implication is clear. Align with me, and you'll be protected. Oppose me, and you'll be burned. And the parallel didn't stop there. In subsequent messages, Lively and Taylor Swift continued the dragon imagery. Lively said, "I have never felt more like Khaleesi. I have dragons, except my dragons are bred with Cersei herself." And Swift replies, "I'm just picturing you muttering Dracarys, and then I fire off those texts to Austin." What's being described here is not leadership, it's not protection, and it's certainly not Daenerys Targaryen. It's leverage, it's intimidation, it's power borrowed from other people and wielded as a threat. And that's exactly why this comparison fails so badly, because Daenerys does not gain followers by coercion, she does not keep them by fear, and she does not excuse harm done in her name. Her story is about responsibility, not domination. About accountability, not immunity, about choosing to stay and fix what she's broken, even when it costs her everything she wants. So if you're going to invoke Daenerys Targaryen as a metaphor for power, you need to understand what kind of power she actually wields. And to do that, we have to unpack the text. So let's start with the basics. Khaleesi is not Daenerys' name. Please someone tell Blake Lively that Khaleesi is not Daenerys' name. In A Song of Ice and Fire, names and titles are important, and confusing the two tells me immediately how shallow the reading is. Khaleesi is not Daenerys Targaryen's identity. It is a title she acquires through marriage to Khal Drogo. It exists only within the Dothraki culture, and it is entirely dependent on her relationship to a Khal. When Drogo lives, she is Khaleesi because she is his wife. When he dies, the status should end. By Dothraki custom, she should be discarded, passed on, and sent to the Dosh Khaleen. In other words, Khaleesi is conditional. It's patriarchal. It is revocable. Dany initially only has power through her husband. So when people insist on calling Daenerys Khaleesi, they're flattening her entire arc into a single aesthetic, exotic violence backed by dragons. The word becomes shorthand for spectacle, threat, and domination, stripped of any context or meaning. But Daenerys does not build her power through titles. She builds it through choice, hers and other peoples. That distinction is crucial, because the text makes something very clear from the beginning. Daenerys does not inherit loyalty, she earns it. After Drogo dies, Daenerys should lose everything. Instead, the remaining Dothraki who are present choose her, not because custom demands it, not because fear compels it, but because she frees them, protects them, and offers them a future that does not involve coercion. That moment is huge because it reframes her authority entirely. She is not Khaleesi because a man has given her that title. She eventually becomes the Khaleesi because the people accept her leadership when they are no longer required to. And even then, Khaleesi is only one of the many titles she accumulates over the course of the story, most of which have nothing to do with Dothraki patriarchy at all. And here's a list of her names and titles. Daenerys Targaryen, the first of her name, Queen of Meereen, Queen of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, called Daenerys Stormborn, the Unburnt, Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Shackles. Every one of those titles tells a story. Some mark survival, some mark loss, some mark responsibility, and some, like Breaker of Shackles, exist precisely because she rejects the violent norms of the cultures she moves through. What's important is this: Daenerys is never defined by a single title. In fact, she explicitly recognizes the role of call, raiding, burning, moving on, is incompatible with the kind of ruler she wants to be. She says so herself. In A Storm of Swords, Daenerys reflects on the destruction she's caused and draws a sharp distinction between conquest and governance. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros, but afterward he gave them peace, prosperity, and justice. But all I have brought to Slaver's Bay is death and ruin. I have been more call than queen, smashing and plundering than moving on. That line matters tremendously, because Daenerys isn't glorifying conquest here. She's criticizing herself. She is recognizing that the methods associated with Khal, or Khaleesi, destruction without stewardship, are insufficient, even immoral, for the kind of rule she believes in. She doesn't want to be a warlord. She wants to heal. She wants to administer justice. She wants to stay. So when people cling to Khaleesi as her defining name, what they're really doing is freezing Daenerys at the shallowest possible point of her arc, before she learns, before she questions herself, before she chooses responsibility over momentum. They also might just really not know that her name is not Khaleesi. I honestly think that. I think Blake Lively thinks that her name is Khaleesi and has no idea that Daenerys is her name. But I digress. They keep the dragons, they keep the threat, and they discard the conscience. And once you do that, it becomes very easy to misuse her as a metaphor for leverage. But that metaphor collapses the moment you actually read the text, because Daenerys Targaryen is not a title. She is a ruler in formation, and every meaningful decision she makes is about the kind of power she refuses to wield. How Daenerys actually gains power. Daenerys' first true act of leadership in her own right does not involve dragons at all. It doesn't come from lineage, it doesn't come from spectacle, it comes from a refusal. At the end of A Game of Thrones, Daenerys looks at the people who have been enslaved by her husband's Khalasar, the women taken as spoils, the elderly left to die, the children stripped of any future, and she chooses to break the cycle instead of continuing it. She does something profoundly destabilizing in a world built on domination. She removes coercion. She tells them, "You will be my Khalasar. I see the faces of slaves. I free you. Take off your collars. Go if you wish. No one shall harm you. If you stay, it will be as brothers and sisters, husbands and wives." This is the moment where people often misread her power, because this isn't a threat, it isn't a demand, and it isn't even a recruitment pitch. She does not say, "Stay or suffer." She does not say, "Follow me or die." She does the opposite of what every other ruler in this world does. She removes force and lets people decide what they want to do next. This is not how power usually works in A Song of Ice and Fire. In Westeros, loyalty is extracted through fear, obligation, or debt. In the Dothraki Sea, it is enforced through violence and strength. Even honorable leaders rule through systems that leave no room for refusal. At the end of A Game of Thrones, and at other points in the novels, Daenerys offers refusal explicitly. Go if you wish, no one shall harm you. And that choice, real, uncoerced choice, is what creates her authority, because what happens next is not automatic. After the dragons are born, after the miracle, after the fire, the text says, "And after them came her handmaids, and then the others, all the Dothraki, men and women and children, and Dany had only to look at their eyes to know that they were hers, hers as they had never been Drogo's." Hers as they had never been Drogo's. Drogo commands obedience. Daenerys inspires allegiance. Drogo ruled through terror and inevitability by being the strongest, mightiest of warriors, undefeated in battle, through the knowledge that resistance would be crushed. Daenerys' people follow her after she gives them an exit. That is the difference. They choose her. And the text is very careful to make that explicit. Daenerys does not inherit Drogo's khalasar the way a Westerosi lord inherits bannermen. She builds something new out of the wreckage of an old system. This is why the common shorthand Khaleesi with dragons doesn't make any sense, because Daenerys' power does not originate with the dragons. George R.R. Martin even said that he originally didn't intend for there to be dragons in the novels at all. So there is a possibility that Daenerys' story could have gone on as it did without dragons, and just with her leadership alone. Because, let's face it, the majority of her achievements don't include the dragons. But the dragons are symbolic, the dragons are terrifying, and the dragons are important. But they come after the moral choice. The foundation of her authority is laid before the dragons hatch, when she frees people who have no reason to trust her, and then proves, through action, that she means it. And this distinction never goes away. Throughout the series, Daenerys repeatedly offers people the ability to walk away. Sometimes they do, often they don't. So once you understand that, it becomes impossible to honestly frame Daenerys Targaryen as a metaphor for coercive power, because her story does not begin with a threat, it begins with liberation. Slaver's Bay, good intentions in a bad world. Daenerys is not torn between good and evil. None of the characters truly are. The world is gray. No matter how much she tries to do the right thing, there are no simple answers. Slaver's Bay is where the question stops being theoretical and becomes brutal. Daenerys tries to end slavery in 3 different ways, and each attempt exposes a different failure baked into the world around her. First, she uses violence. She destroys the slave masters of Astapor, kills those responsible for generations of cruelty, and installs a new ruling structure with the formerly enslaved as the center, and the city collapses. The power vacuum invites chaos. New tyrants rise, the people she freed are slaughtered or re-enslaved. Doing the right thing quickly proves insufficient when no one is left alive to protect the outcome. Next, she tries a second approach. In Yunkai, she compromises. She allows the former masters to live, she forces those former masters to compensate their former slaves, and allow those former slaves to leave the city safely. As soon as Daenerys leaves, slavery continues, and the masters are still strong enough to wage war on Astapor and to come after her. The system survives because the people who benefit from it are still breathing. Then comes Meereen. Here Daenerys makes the choice no conqueror in this world would make. She stays. She stays in a city she does not want to be in. She gives up momentum, she gives up conquest, she gives up her own future for the time being. And the cost of that choice is staggering. As she leads the freed people who attach themselves to her, the text makes something painfully clear when Daenerys makes the choice that defines her entire arc. Enough, Dany slapped the table. No one will be left to die. You are all my people. Her dreams of home and love had blinded her. I will not abandon Meereen to the fate of Astapor. It grieves me to say so, but Westeros must wait. That line should stop any mischaracterizations of her dead in its tracks. She postpones her dream of home. She postpones her claim. She postpones the life she has been told since childhood is her destiny. She stays because her people depend on her. And this is not a momentary impulse. It aligns perfectly with how Daenerys understands leadership throughout the series. Very early on, she articulates a philosophy of rule that's different from almost every Westerosi monarch we see. A queen must listen to all, the highborn and the low, the strong and the weak, the noble and the venal. One voice may speak you false, but in many there is always truth to be found. Listening is not ornamental to her rule, it is foundational. So is protection. Daenerys' understanding of power is shaped not by conquest fantasies, but by trauma, by having lived under a king who abused rather than shielded her. Viserys should have protected me, but instead he hurt me and scared me worse. He shouldn't have done that. He wasn't just my brother, he was my king. Why do the gods make kings and queens if not to protect the ones who can't protect themselves? Justice. That's what kings are for. This is the moral axis of her story. Kingship to Daenerys is not about dominance, it's about obligation, and obligation does not end when it becomes inconvenient or dangerous. Which brings us to Meereen at its worst, when the bloody flux comes to Meereen. Daenerys is warned to stay away. She is told that proximity is unsafe. She risks contamination, that a ruler must preserve herself. Instead, she refuses. She insists that the sick are brought food. She insists on going herself to see them and to help them with her own hands. I will not turn away from them, she said stubbornly. A queen must know the sufferings of her people. Khaleesi, no. The bells in his braids rang softly as he dismounted. You must not get any closer. Do not let them touch you. Do not. Dany walked right past him. She does not issue orders from a distance. She kneels. There was an old man on the ground a few feet away, moaning and staring up at the gray belly of the clouds. She knelt beside him, wrinkled her nose at the smell, and pushed back his dirty hair to feel his brow. His flesh is on fire. I need water to bathe him. Sea water will serve. Who will help me burn the dead? This is not performative compassion. There is no hidden agenda. There is no political advantage here. There is only suffering and her refusal to look away from it. And she keeps choosing responsibility even when it costs her everything she wants, which is why any attempt to reduce her to a shorthand for intimidation, leverage, or dominance doesn't just miss the point of her as a character, it reverses the point entirely. And that misunderstanding becomes even more glaring when we talk about the dragons themselves, which is exactly where people go wrong next. Dragons, guilt, and the child. Now we need to talk about the dragons, because this is where the popular reading of Daenerys collapses completely. In the shallow version of her story, dragons are shorthand for domination, for unchecked power, for intimidation, but the text does not support that reading. When Drogon kills a single child, Hazzea, Daenerys does not react like a conqueror. She does not frame it as collateral damage. She does not rationalize it as the cost of rule. She does not hide behind necessity. She chains 2 of her dragons, not because she is afraid of losing power, but because she is afraid of harming innocents. And the thoughts that follow are not triumphant, they are horrified. Mother of dragons, Daenerys thought, mother of monsters, what have I unleashed upon the world? This is not a ruler reveling in destruction. This is a ruler questioning whether she deserves the power she holds. And then comes the line that is so often ripped out of context. If they are monsters, so am I. This is not self-glorification. This is not bravado. It is guilt. It is the recognition that power implicates the one who wields it, even when the harm was unintended. Daenerys does not distance herself from the violence her dragons cause. She absorbs the responsibility for it. She compensates families for livestock killed by her dragons. She imprisons her own children. She accepts the political cost of appearing weak because protecting people matters more than projecting strength. That is accountability, and this is where the contrast with other rulers becomes impossible to ignore. When Tyrion Lannister is told that his father's forces have committed mass atrocities, his response is chilling in its casualness. A lordling down from the Trident says your father's men burned his keep, essayed his wife, and killed all his peasants. I believe they call that war. No hesitation, no outrage, no moral reckoning. To Tyrion, essay and slaughter are abstractions, acceptable tools of political reality. Daenerys mourns one dead child. Tyrion shrugs at thousands. Daenerys does not see her dragons as weapons to unleash at will. She sees them as a burden she must control or be destroyed by. And the tragedy of her arc is not that she loves power too much. It is that she takes it far more seriously than almost anyone else in the world she inhabits. The false parallel. Only now do we return to the real-world comparison, because at this point, the contrast should be unavoidable. When Daenerys Targaryen is invoked as a metaphor for using powerful allies as dragons, the comparison does not just strain under scrutiny, it collapses, because Daenerys' power does not come from proximity to influence. It does not come from intimidation, and it does not come from leveraging other people's reputations to coerce obedience. Daenerys' authority is built on three things the metaphor never accounts for. First, consent. Again and again, Daenerys removes coercion and lets people choose. The remaining Dothraki can choose to stay with her or go their own way. The Unsullied can choose to stay with her and choose their own leaders by vote, or they can start lives of their own. Those who were enslaved, who she freed, can choose to come with her and form their own communities and vote for their own leaders and their own representatives on her council, or they can return to their own homes. When they follow her, it is because she has given them the ability to walk away. That is the opposite of leverage. Second, sacrifice. Daenerys does not protect her own comfort at the expense of others. She repeatedly postpones her own personal goals of love, home, and Westeros itself because people under her rule would suffer if she left. She even chooses to marry Hizdahr rather than be with Daario, who she loves, because she hopes that Hizdahr will provide safety and security for her people that Daario cannot. She stays when leaving would be easier. She governs when conquering would be faster. She absorbs the cost of stability instead of forcing it onto the powerless. Third, accountability. When harm occurs under Daenerys' rule, even unintentionally, she does not deflect responsibility. She does not say, "This is just how power works." She does not hide behind necessity. She does not ask others to suffer so she can remain unburdened. She chains her dragons. She questions herself. She pays the price. Now compare that to the metaphor being used by Blake Lively and Taylor Swift. The dragons in this real-world framing are not symbols of responsibility or protection. They are symbols of pressure and coercion. The implication is not, "I will protect those who depend on me." The implication is, "You will benefit if you comply and suffer if you don't." That is not Daenerys Targaryen. So if you see yourself in Daenerys, there is a question you cannot avoid. Who are you protecting, and what is it costing you? Because Daenerys always pays the cost herself. And the moment the cost is shifted onto others, the moment power becomes something you threaten with instead of something you carry, the comparison stops working. Not because Daenerys is perfect, but because she is accountable. And that is exactly what people keep getting wrong about her. The show got it wrong. Blake Lively and Taylor Swift have gotten it wrong. But the truth is, these shallow readings come because it's far easier to turn her into a symbol of power than to reckon with what her story is actually about. The cost of trying to rule justly in a world that rewards cruelty and punishes mercy. Thanks for listening to the Lore Weaver podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following the show so you never miss new analysis, reviews, and deep dives. I would also love to hear your thoughts. Share your theories, reactions, or questions in the comments. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.